My son told me to apologize to his wife or leave his house. Those were his exact words. No shouting, no anger, just cold finality in his voice. I stood there, purse clutched tight, in a house that looked more like a museum than a home, wondering when the boy I raised stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an inconvenience. I just embarrassed his wife, Madison. Or so they said, the woman who corrected my every word, who called my peach cobbler too sweet, and who introduced me to her friends as Ethan's mom from the country, as though I were a stray relative they tolerated out of obligation. But that night, in the Charleston mansion filled with polite smiles and silent judgments, I did something none of them saw coming. And it changed everything. Welcome to Life Voices, where family drama turns into late-life justice. If you're watching, tell us your city in the comments. We always read them. That morning had started like a painting. Sunlight slipping through the lace curtains, the scent of jasmine and river air drifting into my little house on the outskirts of Charleston. I hadn't felt that kind of excitement in years. Ethan, my only son, had invited me to dinner at his new home. A formal dinner, he said, with his colleagues and Madison's friends. His first since their move. I'd spent the whole morning preparing. I ironed my pale blue dress, the one he used to call my springtime dress. I polished my shoes, even though no one would look at them. I baked a peach cobbler from scratch, using the same recipe that had won first prize at the county fair 30 years ago. Ethan used to say it was his favorite thing in the world. He'd scrape the pan clean before it even cooled. I remember thinking, maybe tonight will feel like the old days. Maybe Madison would finally see that I wasn't some outdated relic from his past, that I could still belong in his new, glittering world. The drive into Charleston was beautiful. Oak trees heavy with Spanish moss, sunlight bouncing off the Ashley River, the city buzzing with tourists and the distant sound of jazz. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled. Wrinkles, yes. But there was still warmth there. Still hope. When I pulled up to their house, my breath caught. It looked like something out of a magazine. White columns, marble steps, a front door big enough for a church. Madison greeted me at the entrance wearing a silk cream dress that shimmered in the light. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes flicked down at my cobbler dish like I'd brought in a sack of potatoes. "Oh, you didn't have to bring that," she said, her voice all sugar and glass. "We have dessert catered." "I know," I replied gently, "but Ethan always loved my peach cobbler." She laughed, not meanly, just dismissively, and took the dish as though it might leave a stain on her manicure. Inside, everything gleamed. The floors were marble, the chandeliers like glass waterfalls. Every corner smelled faintly of roses and money. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and guests whispered compliments about the decor. "Madison has exquisite taste," one woman murmured to another. "She designed it all herself," another added proudly. I smiled and nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I wasn't used to this kind of perfection. It felt sterile, like a place meant for show, not for living. When Ethan came down the staircase, I felt my heart lift. He looked so handsome, tall, confident, wearing the same shy smile he'd had as a boy. "Mom," he said warmly, kissing my cheek, "you look beautiful." For a moment, it was just us again. No audience, no marble, no Madison. My little boy who once built me Mother's Day cards from cereal boxes. But then Madison slid her arm through his, her diamond bracelet flashing like a signal, and the spell broke. "Ethan, honey, the guests are waiting," she said softly. He nodded, his hand slipping from mine. Dinner was served in a room large enough to hold my entire house. The table stretched so far that you could barely speak to the person at the other end. Madison sat at the head, radiant and poised, while Ethan took the seat beside her. I was placed near the far end, between a woman who sold ethical handbags and a man who wouldn't stop talking about his yacht. Every course had a story. Imported olives, organic greens, wild-caught salmon that cost more than my week's groceries. Madison introduced each dish with rehearsed enthusiasm. I smiled politely and sipped my water. I didn't want to be the simple country woman among city royalty. So I complimented the flowers, asked about their travels, even shared a quiet laugh with the waiter when one guest sent back her soup for being emotionally flat. But my eyes kept drifting to Ethan. He looked tired. Not unhappy exactly, just like someone performing a version of himself. He laughed when Madison laughed, agreed when she spoke, refilled her glass before his own. At one point he caught me watching and gave me a small smile. It was faint, almost apologetic. Then came dessert. Madison rose gracefully, holding a crystal bowl above her head like a prize. The guests gasped on cue. Madison basked in their admiration. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood, and said, "Oh, I think I saw that same label at Target, 2 shelves down from the peanut butter." I meant it as a joke. Truly. But the laughter that followed wasn't the right kind. It was sharp, uneasy. Madison's smile froze, her cheeks turning pink. Ethan's fork clinked against his plate. The quartet stopped mid-song. The air thickened with embarrassment. Not theirs, mine. I looked down at my hands, wishing I could pull the words back, tuck them somewhere safe. But it was too late. Madison muttered something to a friend and excused herself from the table. The sound of her heels, clicking away, echoed like a verdict. When I looked up again, Ethan was staring at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Not angry, just cold. "Mom," he said quietly, "you didn't have to say that." The sentence was short, but it carried years of distance. Years of him learning how to speak their language, polished, careful, detached. I wanted to tell him it was just a joke, that I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But the words stuck in my throat. I looked around the table, at the guests pretending to sip their wine at the untouched honey glistening under the chandelier, and realized I had become the evening's entertainment. The out-of-place mother. The one who didn't know her place. When the dinner ended, I helped clear the plates even though no one asked me to. Madison didn't come back to the table. Her friends avoided my eyes. And my son, my only child, kept talking to everyone else, as if silence would erase what had just happened. But silence doesn't erase. It only echoes. That night, as the Charleston moonlight spilled across the river, I sat alone on the marble steps outside their perfect home, wondering when kindness had turned into an inconvenience. And what I would do about it. It happened over dessert, but the bruise it left went far deeper than a dinner table embarrassment. After Madison fled from the room, conversation collapsed like a tent with its poles kicked out. Someone coughed. Someone else tapped a glass to fill the silence. The quartet began playing again. Too quickly, too loudly, pretending nothing had happened. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, the way my mother taught me when I was a girl. When in doubt, keep your dignity quiet. Ethan avoided my eyes. His jaw flexed the way it used to when he tried not to cry as a boy. He reached for his wine, drained it, and refilled it almost immediately. I wanted to reach across the linen and touch his wrist, whisper, "I'm sorry, son." It was just a silly remark, but something in his posture warned me not to. The distance between us wasn't measured in inches anymore. It was measured in shame. When the plates were cleared, Madison's friend Leela leaned toward another guest and whispered, not quietly enough, "Well, that was awkward." Then louder, "Poor Madison. She's so sensitive about authenticity." A laughter rippled softly around the table. Every word landed like a slap I had to pretend not to feel. The chef brought coffee. The aroma filled the room, bitter and rich, a scent I once loved. Tonight it smelled like finality. I stirred cream into my cup until it went cold, then excused myself to the powder room. Inside, I stared at my reflection under the unforgiving chandelier light. The woman looking back at me was tired, yes, but not cruel. Lines of age crossed my face, but none of them came from malice. I whispered to the mirror. Why can't they see I meant no harm? A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Ethan's voice, quiet, careful. Mom, can I talk to you for a minute? I opened the door. He stood there alone, the noise of laughter faint behind him. His tie was loosened, his eyes rimmed red. Let's step into my office, he said. The study was cold and immaculate. Dark mahogany shelves, books arranged by color instead of title, everything smelling faintly of polish. The same boy who once left toy cars scattered across every surface now kept even his pencils aligned like soldiers. He didn't sit. Neither did I. Mom, he began, you embarrassed her. I was joking. My voice sounded small, defensive even to me. She doesn't think so. Neither did the guests. You made her feel stupid. I didn't mean. He cut me off with a raised hand. Intent doesn't matter. Perception does. You can't say things like that in front of her friends. Her friends. Not our friends. Not family. I took a slow breath. Ethan, do you hear yourself? You sound like her press agent. He looked away, exhaling sharply. You don't understand her world, Mom. She's worked hard to build this life. So have I said quietly. Just because mine doesn't come with marble floors doesn't make it smaller. His eyes flicked up, uncertain, then hardened again. You need to apologize. The words were soft, but final. Apologize? I repeated, almost laughing. For what? For speaking? For making her feel disrespected, he said. You embarrassed me too. There it was, the nail in the coffin. I felt something inside me go still, the way a pond freezes overnight. All right, I said finally. If an apology will fix your evening, I'll give one. He looked relieved, almost grateful, and for a heartbeat I wanted to let him keep that illusion. But my voice came out steadier than I felt. But not tonight. I'll talk to her when I'm ready. Ethan hesitated, then nodded stiffly and opened the door. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for surrendering. I walked back through the hall lined with portraits of Madison in designer gowns. Madison at charity galas. Madison beside famous people whose names I barely recognized. Not one photo of Ethan as a child. Not one of us together. Guests were gathering their coats when I re-entered the dining room. Leila smiled at me, the kind of smile that says, bless your heart, while sharpening the knife. Everything all right, Mrs. Henderson? Just fine, I said. Lovely evening. My voice didn't shake, and that felt like its own small victory. Outside, the Charleston night air was heavy with salt and magnolia. The moonlight made the cobblestones shimmer like water. I stood by my car, breathing in the quiet after the laughter had died. Through the wide windows I could see them. Ethan with his arm around Madison, comforting her as she dabbed imaginary tears. He looked like a man protecting a fragile treasure. I used to be that treasure once. When I finally drove away, the house disappeared behind me in the rearview mirror, glowing like a palace made of glass. Beautiful. Cold. Breakable. Halfway home, I pulled over by the river. The tide was high, the surface rippling under the streetlights. I thought of the little boy who used to collect shells along the same water, bringing them to me with muddy hands and eyes full of pride. Look, Mama, he'd say, this one's perfect. He never cared about polish then, only about finding something real. I sat there until the engine grew cold, the cobbler dish beside me untouched. The lid had cracked during the drive, a small fracture running through the glass like a vein. I ran my thumb over it and whispered, perfect enough. By the time I reached home, it was nearly midnight. The porch light flickered as I unlocked the door. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and old wood, humble scents, honest ones. I set the cobbler on the counter, turned off the lights, and let the darkness wrap around me. Somewhere between exhaustion and hurt, I realized this was only the beginning. Tonight was not the wound, it was the warning. Because a mother can forgive almost anything. But once her child teaches her she's unwelcome, forgiveness becomes something different. It becomes memory. The next morning, I woke to a gray Charleston sky and the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. I brewed coffee strong enough to steady my hands, but the cup rattled anyway. I kept replaying Ethan's words, "You embarrassed me." It didn't matter how many times I told myself he hadn't meant them cruelly. The echo stayed sharp. By noon, I decided to do what I'd always done when peace cracked between us. Bake. I brought out flour, sugar, butter, tried to knead calm into dough. But even the rhythm of the rolling pin couldn't drown the memory of his voice, the careful, practiced tone of a man choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's truth. I told myself he was caught in the middle. I told myself Madison would cool off. Mothers are good at telling themselves stories that make the pain bearable. That evening, I drove back to their house with a basket of biscuits still warm from the oven. The gate opened automatically when it recognized my license plate, the small kindness of technology where human kindness had run short. Madison answered the door. She wore yoga pants and a perfect frown. "Oh," she said flatly, "you came back. I thought I'd bring these. Ethan loves." "He's in a meeting," she interrupted. "What did you need?" Her voice wasn't loud, just thin and sharp, like paper cutting skin. "I wanted to clear the air," I said. "Last night got out of hand. I didn't mean to hurt you." She crossed her arms. "You didn't hurt me, you humiliated me. In front of people who respect us." I swallowed hard. I was joking about the honey. Everyone knew. "No, you knew," she snapped. "They laughed at me. Do you know what that does to someone's reputation in our circle?" "Our circle. Not mine." "Madison," I said gently, "reputation is just noise. Character is what—" She cut me off again. "You wouldn't understand. You've never lived with expectations like ours." I wanted to tell her about the years I worked 2 jobs after my husband died, about patching Ethan's shoes so he could keep playing soccer, about the nights I prayed bills would wait 1 more week. But she wouldn't have understood that kind of expectation. Her world measured worth in followers and imported tableware. She sighed, already bored of the conversation. "Look, Ethan said you'd apologize. So if that's what you came for, let's just do it and move on." I stared at her. "Ethan said you'd apologize." Something inside me twisted. He'd told her, decided for me, as if I were a child needing supervision. I set the basket on the counter. "Tell Ethan I'll speak to him later." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not going to make things easier for you." The words were casual, but the threat beneath them was clear. In that moment, I saw what she really wanted: to win. Not forgiveness, not peace. Control. I left before I said something that couldn't be taken back. Outside, the air was thick with the smell of rain. I sat in my car, engine off, watching droplets form silver trails on the windshield. Inside the mansion, lights glowed warm and perfect. Inside my chest, something cooled to stone. When I finally drove away, I didn't go home. I went to the waterfront instead. The tide was coming in, waves folding over themselves like exhausted prayers. I walked along the boardwalk until the wind tangled my hair and the salt burned my eyes. I thought about all the years I'd spent teaching Ethan kindness, the way he used to hold doors open, the way he'd pick wildflowers for teachers who scolded him, the way he used to say, "Mom, people just need patience." Somewhere between then and now, patience had turned into permission. Permission for others to treat him and me like ornaments in someone else's show. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it. It was Ethan. "Ethan, Madison said you came by." "Me. I did." We didn't get far. Ethan, Mom, please just apologize. I'm trying to keep things calm. Me? Calm for who? Ethan, for everyone. For everyone never means for mothers. I typed, I'll think about it, then turned off the phone. The truth was already decided. I would apologize, but not the way he expected. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room surrounded by quiet objects of my life. Crooked picture frames, a sofa that sagged in the middle, a quilt I'd sewn from Ethan's baby clothes. Each piece whispered a history Madison could never buy. I imagined the conversation we'd had the next evening when they invited me back, Madison waiting with that polite, brittle smile, Ethan hoping to referee peace. I would give them both what they wanted, an apology shaped like lightning. Before dawn, I wrote down the words I meant to say. Not rehearsed, just honest. I wrote until the sky paled and the paper curled from the pressure of my pen. Then I folded it and slipped it into my purse. By the time the sun rose, I felt strangely calm. The ache was still there, but it had edges now, a shape I could hold without bleeding. Because here's the quiet truth no one warns you about motherhood. There comes a moment when loving your child means standing tall even if it breaks his illusion of peace. And tomorrow, I was going to do exactly that. I arrived the next evening just before sunset. Charleston light has a way of softening even the hardest truth. It paints gold on everything, even the things that are already broken. The mansion shimmered against the pink sky like it didn't remember what sorrow looked like. Madison met me at the door, wearing a smile too tight to trust. "You came," she said. "Ethan's finishing a call. I won't take long." The living room glowed with candlelight. Guests from the previous night had returned for some follow-up dinner. Apparently, Madison's reputation required immediate repair. I could feel the hush sweep through the room as I stepped inside, the rustle of silk, the clink of nervous glasses. Everyone waited to see if the spectacle from last night would repeat itself. Ethan appeared, jacket off, sleeves rolled. "Mom," he said, voice low, "let's just get this over with." I nodded, more at peace than I'd felt in days. "All right." Madison sat at the far end of the table, posture perfect, eyes rehearsed in fragility. The others watched like theater critics. I stood at the head, unfolded the small paper from my purse, and took a slow breath. "Madison," I began, "I'm sorry." A ripple of satisfaction crossed her face. She thought victory had come. But I wasn't finished. "I'm sorry that you think value comes from labels. I'm sorry that my son believes peace means pretending. And I'm sorry that a simple truth can shatter such an expensive illusion." Silence. Absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. I looked straight at her, not with anger, but with the kind of pity that tastes like freedom. "I raised my son to tell the truth," I said softly. "I didn't realize he'd marry someone who feared it." A fork slipped from someone's hand. It sounded like thunder. Madison's eyes widened, glassy with disbelief. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed again. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing this was no ordinary family drama, but a reckoning. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my purse. That's all I wanted to say. Then I turned, heels tapping against marble like a drumbeat. No one moved to stop me. No one dared. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, honest. I walked to my car without looking back. The fountain gurgled behind me, oblivious, still performing elegance for whoever needed the illusion. I didn't. The drive home was quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. Somewhere along the bridge over the Cooper River, I laughed, a small, startled laugh that felt like something breaking open. I wasn't sure if it was relief or grief, maybe both. When I reached my little house, the porch light glowed warmly, exactly as I'd left it. I stepped inside, took off my shoes, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. But peace never lasts long. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. Friends from church, neighbors, even my sister in North Carolina. Everyone had heard. Someone at that dinner had filmed my apology. Apparently, it had made the rounds in every social group Madison curated so carefully. Some called me reckless. Others called me brave. I didn't reply to any of them. I just sat with my coffee and watched the sunlight crawl across the kitchen wall, thinking how truth has a way of traveling faster than gossip when it's finally spoken aloud. By evening, there was a knock on my door. Ethan stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes red. He looked younger suddenly, like the boy who used to come to me after nightmares, unsure whether to ask for comfort or forgiveness. "Mom," he said quietly, "you were right." Those words undid me more than any apology ever could. I pulled him inside. He sat at the table where he'd eaten 1,000 peanut butter sandwiches as a child and told me everything. Madison had stormed out after I left, accusing him of betrayal for not defending her harder. When he followed, he discovered a truth even uglier than pride. Half of what she'd bragged about was borrowed or staged. The house, the furniture, even her so-called imported honey business. Smoke and mirrors built on credit and charm. "She lied to everyone," he said, rubbing his forehead. "I thought I was building a future. Turns out I was decorating a lie." I poured him coffee and said nothing. Some lessons don't need commentary. They need quiet. He looked up at me with that same earnest face from long ago. "I forgot what real feels like, Mom. I'm sorry." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Real never left you, Ethan. You just stopped visiting." For a long time we sat there, the night wind whistling through the screen door, the scent of magnolia drifting in. He told me he'd be moving out of the mansion, that he needed to start over somewhere smaller, simpler. I didn't gloat. I only asked, "Do you want some leftover cobbler?" He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. "Yeah," he said, "and maybe some of that Target honey." We laughed until the tension broke, until it felt like home again. That night, after he left, I stood by the window watching the streetlights shimmer on the wet pavement. For years I'd believed motherhood meant never walking away, even when disrespected. But now I understood. Sometimes the truest act of love is refusing to play along with a lie. In that Charleston evening, I finally stopped apologizing for being real. I didn't sleep that night. Not from worry, from clarity. There's a strange calm that follows truth, like the quiet after a storm. The sky outside was pale blue by the time I finally closed my eyes. When I woke, sunlight poured through the curtains, gentle and forgiving. By then, the story had already made its rounds. Someone had leaked the video from the dinner, my apology. People watched it the way they watch a spark catch dry grass. Within hours, it was everywhere. A mother standing up in a room full of people too polite to be kind. My phone rang nonstop. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months called to say they were proud of me. One woman from church said she watched it twice and cried both times. Another said, "You said what we've all wanted to say to someone." I didn't feel proud exactly. Just lighter. Around noon, Ethan showed up again. He looked exhausted but peaceful, like a man who'd finally stopped running. He sat on the porch steps and said quietly, "I moved out." It wasn't dramatic. He didn't pack in fury or slam doors. He just told Madison he needed air, gathered a few things, and left. The mansion, it turned out, wasn't theirs at all, leased for image. The cars borrowed through business partnerships. Even the ring Madison flaunted was financed on a card Ethan didn't know existed. She wanted to live in a story she could control, he said, staring at his hands. I kept helping her tell it. I brought him a glass of sweet tea and said, "Sometimes the only way to find peace is to lose the performance." He smiled weakly. "She told everyone you ruined her life." "Good," I said. "Then she can finally start living her own." He laughed, short and surprised, then leaned back against the railing. The breeze carried the smell of jasmine and coffee from my kitchen. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt comfortable. A week later, Ethan called to say he'd found a small townhouse not far from mine. No marble, he said, but it feels real. He asked if I'd come help pick curtains. I told him I'd bring my peach cobbler instead. When I walked into his new place, boxes still stacked high, I saw something that made me stop, a jar of honey on the counter. Cheap, local, bright yellow label. He grinned when he caught me looking. Thought we'd start fresh, he said. We sat on the floor eating cobbler, right out of the dish, laughing over nothing, talking about everything. About his childhood, about Madison's obsession with being admired, about how easy it is to lose yourself trying to impress people who never mattered. That night, before I left, he hugged me longer than usual. I almost forgot what it's like to breathe, he whispered. You're breathing now, I told him. Don't stop. Driving home, the city lights glittered on the river like tiny lanterns. I passed their old mansion, dark and quiet. The for lease sign hung crooked at the gate. A part of me pitied Madison, but not enough to mourn her lies. Some people build glass houses and call it ambition. The rest of us plant roots and call it peace. When I reached my little home, I poured a cup of tea, stepped out onto the porch, and watched fireflies blink above the grass. I thought about how quickly things can shift. One sentence, one stand, one truth spoken at the right time. Sometimes courage doesn't look grand. It looks like a woman refusing to shrink. And that night, I understood something I never had before. Love doesn't mean silence. It means honesty, even when honesty costs you everything. The world had seen a mother stand her ground, but I'd simply remembered who I was. The woman who raised a boy with her bare hands. The woman who laughed in the face of marble and gold. The woman who chose truth over peace and found peace anyway. A month passed, and life settled into a gentler rhythm. Ethan's townhouse was small but bright, with mismatched furniture and sunlight that fell warm through bare windows. He called it a work in progress. I called it home. Every Sunday he came to my house for dinner. No guests, no table settings planned to impress anyone. Just us, 2 plates, the smell of garlic, and peach cobbler in the oven. We laughed more in those evenings than we had in years. Sometimes he'd look around and say, almost shyly, I miss this, Mom. One afternoon, while we watered my garden, he said, You know, Madison always hated dirt on her hands. She said it ruined her nails. He paused, then smiled. I like the mess. So did I. Life had been too polished for too long. The little imperfections, the chipped mug, the uneven rows of tomatoes, felt like proof that things could grow again. He told me he'd started volunteering at a local shelter, helping people find jobs. Feels good to do something real, he said. I could hear the quiet pride in his voice. That boy who once promised never to forget where he came from was finding his way back. One Sunday he brought coffee and a jar of honey, cheap store brand, same bright yellow label. He set it on the table like a gift. You know, he said, grinning, this tastes better than that fancy stuff ever did. We laughed until we cried, the kind of laughter that washes old pain clean. Later, after he left, I sat on the porch, watching the Charleston sunset burn orange over the river. The wind carried the scent of salt and magnolia, and I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. For years I'd believed peace meant keeping quiet, smoothing over sharp edges, pretending everything was fine. But peace built on pretending isn't peace at all, it's performance. Real peace is the sound of your own truth filling a room, even if that room empties after you speak. Now, when I wake, I don't feel that heavy ache in my chest anymore. I make my coffee, tend my garden, and thank God for second chances. Especially the kind that come disguised as heartbreak. Because sometimes you have to lose your place at the table to remember you can build your own. And in the soft Charleston mornings, with sunlight slipping through the moss and my heart steady again, I know I didn't lose a son that night. I found him. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't look heroic. It looks honest. It means losing the illusion, but gaining your self-respect. That night, when I walked out of that marble house, I thought I was losing everything. But what I really lost were the walls I'd built around my own voice. Ethan found his way back, and I found mine. Now, when I taste honey, even the cheap kind, I remember that truth has its own sweetness. It may sting first, but it never spoils. So tell me, have you ever had to choose truth over peace? Have you ever swallowed words to keep the calm, only to realize the silence hurt more? Because sometimes, my dear, peace built on pretending isn't peace at all. It's a cage with velvet curtains. And when you finally walk out, you don't lose your home. You come home to yourself. Subscribe for more family dramas. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Share your story below.